Barney wanted it faster. Elrington smashed by Genge.
Oh, hold on a minute. I'm used to people falling over when I hit them. What is happening?
Minutes into the game, both their front rowers were done. They sound like choo-choo trains.
He looked like a bad dude, and Alex just took him to the ground and was over in seconds.
A couple of months ago, I made a video on why the British tend to suck at wrestling and grappling in general, and it's safe to say it received an overwhelmingly positive response. But some of my eagle-eyed followers identified a chink in my argument. Down in the depths of Atherton lies an individual, moulded by rugby league and a love of martial arts, gradually rising into prominence. Although he's largely escaped the public eye and widespread press coverage, the sleeping giant has slowly been racking up impressive wins across the heavyweight division. But who is this mystery man, and could he embody the beginning of a tidal wave of capable British grapplers descending upon the MMA in future years to come? Well, let's go back to his roots. Tom Aspinall was born on the 11th of April 1993 in Atherton, Greater Manchester. This area in the north of England garners fanatical support for rugby league, a form of rugby which involves constant heavy tackles and players being dragged to the ground. There are regularly one-on-one situations in which a sole player is depended upon to get the player in possession to unintentionally touch the ground with the ball, with the overwhelming objective of wrestling being to put your opponent on his back, effectively pinning him down. You can see broad similarities with the rugby tackle. Anyway, Tom's father, Andy Aspinall, was obsessed with rugby league, having made it to a decent level as he played alongside England's current manager, Shaun Wane. Consequently, Tom was thrust into playing the sport as a younger kid, which gradually began to instill the relevant body mechanics and ability to control and exert weight upon another individual. Whilst Khabib was wrestling bears in the late 1990s, Tom was groping young men on a rugby pitch. With his father's guidance, he began to learn how to stop a person moving as efficiently as possible. But Tom's dad was not solely a rugby specialist, as he is trained heavily in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, regularly coaching at a gym in Wigan. Consequently, Tom followed in his father's footsteps by beginning to train in BJJ, along with wrestling and boxing by the age of only 7. He would proceed to win the British Open in BJJ in all belt classes except black belt. Whilst Tom was in his teen years, Andy Aspinall was appointed as the jiu-jitsu instructor of Team Calbon, a prestigious fighting gym which has housed fighters such as Darren Till, Mike Grundy and Paul Taylor. This fully immersed Tom in the MMA world, and he trained there religiously, while simultaneously growing from 5'8" to 6'5" within the space of a year, the size of a heavyweight. Having blitzed through the opposition in many of his early amateur fights with a mixture of knockouts, punches and arm triangle chokes, he was offered a contract by the UFC, yet he felt he was not quite ready for the organisation and turned it down. Instead, in his early 20s, Tom signed a 5-fight contract with Cage Warriors, beating his first 2 opponents with ease. It was only then that Aspinall decided to take the plunge into the big leagues, namely the UFC. After his first scheduled bout against Jake Collier was cancelled due to the COVID pandemic, it would later take place on July the 25th, 2020 at UFC on ESPN 14. He was awarded with the Performance of the Night award after a technical knockout in round 1. Aspinall's second UFC appearance took place at UFC Fight Night against Alan Bordat on October the 11th, 2021. He won the fight via first round technical knockout. Aspinall's next challenge came against Andrei Arlovsky at UFC Fight Night on February the 20th, 2021. In this bout, he showcased his grappling capabilities with a submission in round 2. A Brit winning via submissions, mental. On September the 4th, 2021 at UFC Fight Night 191, Aspinall fought Sergey Spivak, with the Englishman winning via technical knockout in round 1. A seriously impressive performance. The next test came in the form of Alexander Volkov, a Russian colossus who he fought on March the 19th, 2022 at UFC Fight Night 204. Aspinall won the fight via a straight armbar submission in round 1. Looking to capitalise further on this winning run, Aspinall faced Curtis Blades on July the 23rd, 2022 at UFC Fight Night 208. but disaster struck.
Huge right hands.
The fight was lost by technical knockout 15 seconds into the first round, after Aspinall was rendered unable to continue due to a knee injury. A disaster to say the least. Anyways, Tom Aspinall is obvious evidence that rugby can assist one's wrestling capabilities, but he has had the advantage of being taught by a father who is proficient in jiu-jitsu. Well, let's explore another example of rugby's effect on wrestling from the opposite side of the globe. Alexander Volkanovski, an MMA fighter from Wollongong, Australia. Fighting out of the featherweight division and boasting an unblemished UFC record until very recently against Islam Makhachev, the Aussie hailed directly from a rugby league background. In footage from his playing days, Volkanovski can be seen consistently tackling much larger opponents to the ground, along with rebuffing tackle attempts aimed at taking him to the floor. Granted, he had wrestled a year prior to beginning his rugby career, winning the Australian Nationals, yet his predisposition to taking opponents down with ease in an MMA environment can certainly be linked partly to his rugby background. This fact is succinctly explained by former England rugby union player James Haskell.
Because wrestling is such a key element of being able to control someone's body, to be able to change height. You know, footwork, having your feet in close to someone and tackle them, you know, it's the same thing in rugby, it's the same thing in wrestling. You need to be able to get underneath your opponent, you need to be able to control your opponent, and rugby clubs around the country are doing more and more of it.
One counterpoint which keen rugby fans may point to is the lack of much contact once a player has been taken to the ground. After all, once a player has been tackled, his opponent must release him to enable him to play the ball. Consequently, there is not much actual grappling on the ground, which is the fundamental aspect of wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Well, this is where a stronger wrestling culture is needed in order to allow rugby players to turn their skills of taking down opponents into actual grappling prowess. In Australia, there are roughly 500,000 registered rugby league players at all levels, 52,000 of which are adults. Meanwhile, in Britain, around 195,000 people play rugby union and 46,000 participate in rugby league. With the vast majority of these players being in their youth and adolescent years, this represents a crop of participants who could theoretically make the transition over to wrestling if their love of rugby wanes. With the absence of wrestling from the school curriculum, lack of MMA wrestling gyms, and general suspicions surrounding rolling around on a sweaty mat with an opponent, wrestling has undoubtedly failed to take off in Britain. But rugby certainly presents an avenue through which this issue could be remedied in time. Could rugby be the answer to creating a generation of elite British grapplers? I'm keen to hear your thoughts in the comments. And once again, please like and subscribe.